Their very cheery conversation that we saw in between the expanded meetings between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump. But there's a lot of ground to cover. And before we do that, I'm just going to introduce some of the experts with me in studio. To my right is Professor Park Won-gon, Professor of International Studies, Language and Literature at Handong Global University, and our very own reporter Kim Min-ji with me. Sorry, I meant James Kim. Excuse my, sorry, I got confused with a lot of newscasts coming in. James Kim, Professor, sorry. We just listened to a North Korean leader and Donald Trump exchange a very free-flow conversation. I want to start with you. What was your takeaway from it? We had conversations talking about the declaration of the end of the war, setting up a communication line in Pyongyang and in Washington as well. What's your take on it?
Well, the liaison office idea was floated out there. It was first agreed to in '94 agreed framework. In fact, there was a provision in there about that. So having the two leaders agree to this is a positive step, largely because the U.S. wants to keep a continuing dialogue. A channel that they could go to. It's a confidence building measure as well, so that there's no miscommunication between the two sides. So there are a lot of positives that you can get from just having that channel be opened on a formal level. The thing that really struck me was the time at the moment when the reporters asked a question to Kim Jong-un. And Kim Jong-un wanted to, his response was, I'd like to spend time discussing things with my counterpart. And then President Trump redirecting the question and saying that he wants to hear what Chairman Kim had to say about that. That was a very striking moment for me. And Kim Jong-un actually complying and answering the question. Because
of their closer relationship that we see on camera?
Closer relationship, but essentially, I think, President Trump was dictating there. What Kim Jong-un should be doing.
But that's what we've been seeing with President Trump. He's a free flower. He just goes wherever he wants to go,
right.
Even during live press conference.
That's right. So this was a very striking moment, and to do that in the open with the press. So overall, I thought there were some really striking moments there. Kim Jong-un answering the questions, and there are a lot of positives, but again, we have to hold out and see what exactly they get at the end of the day.
We are still waiting for that expanded meeting to come to an end, but based on the footages that we were able to see, does that imply that we may be able to see some fruitful, some productive, tangible outcome towards the end of the day? What do you say?
Yeah, I think the litmus here and what we should look for is meaningful outcome. And if road to full and final verification, verifiable denuclearization, FFVD, is a 100-step process. If we can take even 1 or 2 or 3 steps, the more steps we take in that direction is a good thing. But even 1 step, I think, is a meaningful outcome for this summit.
And Min-ji, just quickly before we rerun that tape, I think as reporters it was interesting to see how Trump was referring to holding a conference together, press conference. He kept saying we're going to hold press conference later on and return to our respective countries. Could we see, do you think, is it plausible that we see both leaders standing before reporters, fielding questions perhaps, or just announcing their outcome of the day?
A press conference is scheduled for 3:50 p.m. local time, so that will be about 5:50 here. Now, it's scheduled to take place at the JW Marriott, where President Donald Trump is staying, so we don't know for sure whether Kim Jong-un will be there or not. But some experts have said if they do reach a satisfactory deal, Kim Jong-un could indeed make a presence there, possibly not fielding questions from reporters, but reading the joint declaration. But we have seen at the previous one-on-one this morning him taking questions. He was asked whether he was confident.
And just now as well, I mean, he was fielding questions, in fact, from his U.S. counterpart, Donald Trump. So I think it is positive that we see perhaps maybe a change in their style of holding summits later on.
Yes, it could be possible.
And I think we have our tape ready, the video clip that we just saw with both leaders speaking in between their expanded summit. Let's take a look. In fact, I think we are still waiting for that video footage to come in. And also some other points that I wanted to make comment on is how the reporters were asking questions about the declaration of the end of the war. That's something a lot of the reporters here in Seoul were also asking to, South Korean president. I mean, does it require 4 parties, U.S., both Koreas and China, to be in one spot to, make it official and declare the end of the Korean War? But there was no yes or no answer from the clip that we just saw. What do you say?
Right. So I think the key here is that the armistice signature involved those 4 parties. So if you want to have a legal end to the war, and you want to sign a peace treaty, that is the legal completion of the war. Peace treaty would require the other parties. But the end of war declaration is simply a declaration. It's a statement that North Korea and the United States will be making that we've ended the Korean War. And there's no legal obligation there or implication about whether or not the war has actually ended. So a lot of legal scholars say this is a symbolic gesture. It's a political statement that these 2 leaders are making that they want to work towards a peace treaty. But again, it depends. But some people have argued, as Steve Biegun did, just in Stanford, I believe, last month, in a public statement, that if you think about it, even though the 2 Koreas have signed an armistice and there's a ceasefire, we've been at a de facto end of war, Korean War.
I mean, just symbolically making a statement like that between the 2 leaders, I think, would be a milestone going forward.
Right. So part of the reason why this issue keeps coming up is Steve Biegun has actually announced that's something that the U.S. is willing to go along with.
Okay, I think we have a video footage ready, so we're just going to play back that soundbite where we just heard North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump freestyling before members of the press. Listen to this.
Not quite yet. 비핵화를 위해서 구체적인 조치들을 취하실 결심이 되어 있으니까 아직 안 됐으니까 아직 그때까지는.
오늘 지금 그 이야기를 하고 있습니다.
That is what we are discussing right now.
And don't raise your voice, please. This isn't like dealing with Trump.
네, 목소리 크게 하지 마십시오. 나하고 얘기하는 게 아닙니다.
매우 궁금해하는 것 같습니다.
They're very curious.
I think they're anxious and they're calm.
Chairman Kim, are you discussing human rights with President Trump?
인권도 논의하고 있습니까?
We're discussing everything.
모든 걸 다 논의하고 있습니다, 지금.
So I just want to thank everybody for being here. We're having very productive discussions. We'll see where it all goes, but we are having very productive discussions, and we appreciate it. I think we're having a press conference later on, and we'll then be heading out back to our respective homes. But I think we've had very, very productive discussions, and the relationship is as good as it's ever been. Better, I think better. Go ahead.
우리가 지금 상당히 생산적인 그런 회의를 하고 있습니다. 생산적인 회의를 하고 있습니다. 그리고 나중에 또 기자회견을 하게 되겠습니다만 일단 지금 상당히 생산적인 회의를 하고 있고 기자회견이 끝난 다음엔 각자 자기 나라로 돌아가게 됩니다. 우리 관계는 그 어느 때보다 좋고 또 오늘도 더 좋아졌습니다.
More political what?
Political statement and more. The time right now.
종전선언을 할 시간이 되었습니까?
I think no matter what happens, we're going to ultimately have a deal that's really good for Chairman Kim and his country and for us. I think ultimately that's what's going to happen. That's where it's all leading. It doesn't mean we're doing it in one day or 2 days, but it's all leading toward a very, very big success. And I really believe that with this great leadership, I really believe that North Korea is going to be very successful. And economically, it's going to be something very, very special. Go ahead.
네, 궁극적으로 우리는 아주 큰 성공으로 나아가고 있습니다. 물론 이것이 하루나 이틀에 다 되는 것은 아니지만 앞으로 방향은 큰 성공으로 나아가고 있다 생각합니다. 그리고 김정은 위원장의 훌륭한 지도력 하에서 북한은 굉장히 아주 성공적인 미래로 나아가고 있습니다.
Chairman Kim, are you ready to allow the United States to have an office in Pyongyang? Are you ready for that step?
김정은 위원장님, 그 미국이 평양에 연락사무소를 개설하는 것에 대해서 준비가 되어 있습니다. Is it better to leave, let the
Yeah, I think we
media
will.
go?
I think we will. It's actually an interesting question. I would like to actually hear that answer because it's actually not a bad idea.
그런데 지금 이 질문에 대한 위원장의 답변을 듣고 싶습니다.
아마 환영할 만한 일이라고 생각합니다.
This is something that we can be
It's
welcoming.
something which is welcomeable.
Is welcome today would be announced?
오늘 발표가 될
I
예정입니까?
actually think it's a good idea, both ways.
나도 이게
both
좋은
ways.
생각이라고 생각합니다. 이거는 양쪽 상방향 다 좋은 그런 일이라고 생각합니다.
I like it.
우리가 충분한 이야기를 좀 더 할 시간을
more time
주셨으면
to
좋겠습니다. 우린 1분이라도 귀중하니까.
Every moment
If
is
you
very
kindly give
valuable
us
for
more
us.
time between us, because 1 minute, even 1 minute is more precious to us.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you very much.
A comprehensive and interesting way of having a conversation in between, especially in front of the global press watching live. Professor, I want to go. My personal question also is, we keep hearing Donald Trump saying, he keeps downplaying the expectations of the outcome of the summit, saying he's not in a rush, he can wait, he can take step by step. But at the same time, he keeps mentioning that North Korea has so much of a, is prosperous when it comes to economic development. Perhaps, trying to win Kim Jong-un's support in perhaps relaxing some economic sanctions. What do you say?
Yeah. I think you got to think about sort of the overall approach. If Donald Trump has a strategy, a lot of experts say he doesn't, but let's say for the moment that he in fact has a strategy here. Could that strategy be one that is looking at a long game on North Korean denuclearization? If that's the case, then what he wants to do is dangle out there a carrot and an incentive for the slow-moving turtle, which is North Korea, to take one additional steps towards that denuclearization, which will win him that prize of economic development. So denuclearization for Trump is, he's not in any rush to get this done overnight. He's not going to move the turtle from here to the prize at the end of in a minute, but he wants North Korea to sort of coax North Korea along in that process. If that's the case, then all of this kind of makes sense. Donald Trump is not looking to finish this, overnight.
But at the same time, at the back of my head, Donald Trump has his own issue at home. I mean, we have his former lawyer and also a fixer, Michael Cohen, giving testimonies against Donald Trump, indicating that perhaps the U.S. president desperately does need some concrete outcome out of this summit to win some vote for his re-election for next presidency. So is that why he keeps downplaying it, the expectation? Because the way that we've seen with the two leaders holding negotiations, we weren't used to seeing Donald Trump dangling the carrot at the end of the stick.
Right. So that is domestic politics, what you're referring to. And the question for his constituents and the base is, are we going to war with North Korea over this issue, or are we not going to war with North Korea over this issue? Do we need to do that? And I think Donald Trump has already answered that question by saying he thanks Chairman Kim for not testing any, not engaging any additional nuclear tests or rocket tests, as they call it. Overall, so from a domestic politics standpoint, he's already got his win over the past year or so, which is no tests. And a de facto freeze, I think he seems to be relatively satisfied with that for the time being. So for him, he's in no rush on that area. With respect to these other matters, if you take a look at the New York Times today or the Washington Post, the front page news is just pasted with Michael Cohen issues. Washington is very busy on that. And then secondly, China trade. Lighthizer just gave a testimony last night as well in Washington about the trade issue with China. And it sounds like North Korea is no longer the top of the line issue, though it is an important front page news issue. It has to share the spotlight with these other issues. So for him, it's a different issue that he wants to sort of he has to deal with. and he's trying to fight for more limelight here, and so far he hasn't been as successful. So it's going to be interesting in the coming months. Is he really that desperate about a positive outcome on denuclearization? Do his constituents care is the important question. And do they care whether North Korea has a nuclear weapon, or do they care whether or not North Korea wants to go to war with the United States with their nuclear weapon? So I think Trump wants to just tone that down a bit and call that a win, essentially. If we assume that that's the thinking here, then all of this makes sense, why he's satisfied with the current situation, why he's not in any rush, yet he's dangling that carrot out there for North Korea to coax it along.
And I also want to turn our focus to that liaison office that the two leaders positively and optimistically discussed. Minji, what was your takeaway from that? I mean, it looks like that we may be able to hear some sort of an outcome later today about them either setting up a liaison office in the coming months or not. What do you say?
So we have heard this in recent months or recent weeks of possibly exchanging liaison officers between the two sides. Some of the experts I've talked to said it's something symbolic. It's not something that's going to take a lot of effort. And to highlight the symbolism between the two to improve their ties, it was one of the pillars of the Sentosa agreement reached in June in Singapore last year. It would also be one of the focal points there. So it wouldn't be a too burden on both sides. Now, some have said that it could be formed in a third country, or even better would be one in Pyongyang and one back in Washington.
But based on the conversation that we just heard, what can we allude? My takeaway was that they were going to set it up in each of their capitals, and one in Washington and the other in Pyongyang.
Right, that's been sort of what's been talked about. It would be a terrible embarrassment for both leaders if they've announced that they said, you know, they thought it was a good idea, that, you know, that they should have it. Donald Trump even redirected the question to get Kim Jong-un to answer that question, or in fact, he wanted to hear what he had to say on that matter. It would be a huge embarrassment if they don't have a provision about this in the final agreement. So I think that there's some tentative agreements on this issue that we should look out for.
And before we get to other news that we have lined up, what does it really take for the two sides to set up a liaison office step by step? What would they need? Would they need to exchange delegation? Does that mean this could eventually lead to setting up their own embassies in each of their countries? Right,
so it would be a de facto embassy, so to speak, but you wouldn't call it an embassy per se, because you don't have a normalized diplomatic relationship. But essentially, it would be, you know, a U.S. official that will be based in Pyongyang that would be open to, you know, get Washington to, you know, relay messages to the leaders in Pyongyang and vice versa. It is useful in the sense that you're there around the clock, 24 hours, 7 days of the week. And it's also useful in the sense that if, you know, North Korea, let's say, test fires a missile, was that a test fire, or was it an accident? So, you know, you could get you could allow for minimization of any kind of misunderstanding between the two. If something were to happen that was unexpected. Overall, I think it would also involve, because we have the sanctions in place, we can't get the United States to transfer over any cash to North Korea for building those facilities there.
Right, it's going to be very difficult. That's why I wanted to know step by step, what are we talking? Because setting up a liaison office alone would also entail them having to lift some of the economic sanctions that all of us have been talking about.
So it would involve an in-kind agreement of some sort, where North Korea will agree to build an office for the U.S. delegates, and the U.S. will also offer to build the office in Washington for the delegates from North Korea. So all the spending and expenses would have to be covered by the, you know, for the North Korean delegation in the U.S. by the U.S. government, and vice versa. For the U.S. delegates in North Korea, the North Koreans would have to provide all the housing and food and other expenses. So it would be a bit tricky, but it's not impossible you know, we have liaison office in Kaesong, for instance. So it's very much possible to do this. The question is, where is it going to be? Is it really going to be in Pyongyang and in Washington, or is it going to be somewhere else, maybe along the DMZ or some other country?
What looks more practical at this point?
The easiest way to do it is probably in a third country, but you don't have the clear, open communication channel 24/7 if that's the case. So the best type of channel is one that's you know, in Pyongyang and Washington.
And the purpose that would suit it the most would be having it in each other's capitals.
Exactly. And so that would be the most ideal thing, but as I've said, there are certain challenges to doing that. And the question is, you know, how are they going to go about doing it? If it's a third country, North Koreans don't have to worry much about it. The U.S. can pick up all the expenses related to that. They just need to send their delegates there, and, you know, U.S. will cover the expenses for those delegates as well.